Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. The moment we rolled into Cypress Bend, I knew trouble was waiting. A pink-sweatered woman with the glare of a drill sergeant blocked our driveway, shouting that our new home was hers. She had no idea who she was messing with, and this war for peace and freedom had just begun. The moving truck rumbled down the quiet road of Cypress Bend just as the late afternoon sun dipped behind the rows of manicured houses. I was driving my own SUV ahead of it, my wife Emily in the passenger seat, our daughter Lauren asleep in the back with her headphones still on. We'd made the long trip from Atlanta to South Carolina, and now, finally, we were pulling into the driveway of what was supposed to be our fresh start. A new house, a clean slate, a place where no one knew us as anything other than the butlers who'd just moved in. The property stood apart from the identical houses of the HOA-run neighborhood, its large lot marked by a gravel driveway and a small white gate. I'd done my homework. This house wasn't part of Cypress HOA. The property lines and title documents had been double-checked and blessed by every official with a stamp. Legally, this land was as free as a bald eagle on the 4th of July. And yet, standing right there at the edge of my driveway was a woman who looked like she'd been sent straight from hell's HOA boardroom. She was in her late 50s, stiff posture, wearing a pale pink sweater and pressed slacks like she was ready to lead a church committee. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, and her expression was the kind that made you feel like you'd just parked on her hydrangeas. I slowed the SUV and rolled down my window. Before I could say a word, she shouted, "I don't know who told you could be here, but this house belongs to my sister. You need to turn around and leave before I call the sheriff." Her tone was so sharp it could have cut through steel. Emily gave me a bewildered look, and I could feel Lauren stirring in the back seat. I took a slow breath, parked, and stepped out, forcing myself to smile. "Good afternoon," I said, pulling a manila folder from under my arm. "My name is Jeremy Butler. I bought this property. Here's the title, signed and sealed by the county. I have the keys and the sale closed 2 weeks ago. This is my house now." The woman didn't even glance at the documents I offered. Her lips tightened like I just told her the moon was made of cheese. "That's impossible. My sister, Sandra Dabney, had this house under listing. You must have scammed the sale. Do you think you can just waltz into Cypress Bend and claim a house? I am Karen Dabney, president of the HOA. And I will not allow trespassers on our property." She said "our" like she personally owned every square inch of land within 3 miles. "Karen," I said, letting her name roll off my tongue like it left a bad taste. "This property is outside of Cypress HOA. Look," I pointed to the stone marker by the gate. "The HOA line ends there." My lawyer triple-checked the deed. "Your HOA has 0 jurisdiction here. And as for your sister, well, she must not have told you she lost the bid. I outbid her client, and the title is clean. Would you like to see the county stamp again?" Karen's face twisted into a sneer. "I don't believe a word you're saying. People like you think you can cheat the system. I'm calling the police." She whipped out her phone like a gunslinger. I sighed, stepped back, and waved toward Emily to stay inside. I wasn't about to argue with a woman who had lawsuit written all over her forehead. Within 10 minutes, a county patrol car pulled up, lights flashing. 2 officers stepped out, one young and stiff, the other older, with the kind of weary smile you see on someone who's dealt with one too many neighborhood feuds. "Evening," the older officer said, glancing between Karen and me. "We got a call about a trespasser." Karen wasted no time. "Yes, officer. This man is trying to move into my sister's house. He has no right to be here. He's probably got forged papers or something. I demand he be removed immediately." I handed over my folder calmly, letting the officer inspect the title documents, the bill of sale, even my driver's license. He nodded slowly, then looked at Karen with an expression that was half amusement, half exasperation. "Ma'am, everything here is perfectly legal. The house belongs to Mr. Butler. If anyone's trespassing, it would be you." Karen's jaw nearly hit the pavement. "What? That's ridiculous. This is my neighborhood. My HOA..." The officer chuckled. "Your HOA doesn't extend to this property, ma'am. It's county land. I'd suggest you let these folks get settled and move along." He turned to me, tipping his hat. "Welcome to Cypress Bend, Mr. Butler. Don't mind the excitement. It's usually quieter around here." Karen's face was burning crimson. "This isn't over," she hissed, glaring at me like I'd just burned her petunias. Then she stormed back across the road to a gleaming silver SUV, slamming the door so hard I thought the windows would shatter. As she drove off, I could hear her muttering something about lawyers and frauds. I watched her go, jaw tight, realizing that the peace and quiet I'd envisioned for our new home might already be slipping through my fingers. Emily stepped out of the car, shaking her head. "Who was that?" she asked. I sighed, sliding the papers back into the folder. That, I muttered, was trouble with a capital K. The movers had already started unloading boxes when I turned to the driveway again. For a split second, I had the unsettling feeling that someone was still watching us. A couple of neighbors stood on their porches, pretending to check their mail, but clearly eavesdropping on every word. I gave them a curt nod and focused on helping Emily get our first box inside. This was supposed to be the start of something good. And yet, as I crossed the threshold of our new home, I couldn't shake the thought, this was only round one. The next morning, I woke to the sound of a heavy thud against the front porch. At first, I thought it was one of the movers dropping a box, but when I opened the door, I found a crumpled flyer taped to the mailbox and a stack of envelopes scattered across the steps. One envelope had been slid open, as if someone had been nosing through my mail. I bent down, picked up the papers, and saw a note scrawled in bold, angry letters. "You don't belong here. Leave now while you still can." The handwriting was jagged, and the ink had smudged slightly, as if the writer had been trembling with rage. My gut told me exactly who had delivered this masterpiece of subtlety: Karen Dabney. I took a moment to breathe before I went back inside. Emily was in the kitchen unpacking dishes, still in her robe, her hair messy from sleep. I didn't want to spook her, but I slid the note across the counter. "Look at this," I said. She frowned, reading it twice. "You think this is her?" I didn't even need to answer. We both knew it. Emily rubbed her forehead. "Jeremy, we just moved here. I don't want to start a war with a neighbor, but this is insane." I smiled grimly. "Don't worry, I don't plan on letting her scare us off." Later that day, I stepped outside to take a look at the property line. As I walked along the gravel drive, I spotted a figure standing across the street. It was a woman, phone in hand, snapping photos of my yard. Not Karen this time, someone else. She wore oversized sunglasses, a visor, and that same judgmental aura. I crossed the road, determined to find out what she was doing. "Can I help you?" I asked, loud enough to make her jump. She gave me a thin smile. "Oh, I'm just documenting violations. Karen said your front yard might be against HOA guidelines." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Then Karen forgot to mention this property isn't under HOA rules, and neither am I. So maybe you can put your camera away and mind your own business." The woman muttered something and retreated, still pretending to check the landscaping as she scurried off. That made my blood boil, but I let it go. For now. By noon, I had my own plan. I ordered a full set of security cameras, motion-triggered, infrared, the works, and arranged for a locksmith to install high-grade locks. If Karen wanted to snoop around or play HOA dictator, she'd have to do it while being recorded. I wasn't taking chances. My background as an IRS investigator had taught me that bullies are most dangerous when they think no one is watching. Around mid-afternoon, I ran into a couple of neighbors while unloading boxes. A middle-aged man named Tom stopped by to welcome us, though his tone carried a hint of warning. "You might want to watch out for Karen," he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder. She thinks she runs this whole street, even the houses that technically don't answer to her. It's better to stay on her good side." I smirked. "What if she doesn't have a good side?" He hesitated, then laughed nervously. "Then, friend, you might be in for some fireworks." By evening, those fireworks were already crackling. A beat-up pickup truck rolled up, headlights flashing, and a man tossed 2 garbage bags onto our driveway before peeling out. Emily rushed to the window. "What was that?" I grabbed my phone, checked the camera feed from the temporary doorbell cam, and grinned coldly. "Evidence," I said. "We're dealing with amateurs." That night, while Emily put Lauren to bed, I set up 2 temporary cameras and checked the footage twice. I wasn't going to let this nonsense escalate without a counterpunch ready. Just as I was locking up, my phone buzzed. It was Officer Henderson, the older cop from yesterday. He'd swung by to check on things, having heard about Karen's stunt from the dispatcher. We spoke for 10 minutes on the porch. Henderson shook his head, saying, "She's got a reputation. Calls and complaints about everything from barking dogs to lawn ornaments. You're not the first she's tried to intimidate. But don't let her fool you. She doesn't have a leg to stand on with your property. I thanked him, feeling slightly better, though a part of me knew Karen wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The following morning, the chaos truly began. I was halfway through my coffee when a White County pickup truck rolled into the driveway. A man in a reflective vest and a hard hat stepped out, clipboard in hand. "Morning, sir," he said, eyeing the property like he was about to condemn it. "We received a complaint about unauthorized construction. I'm here to inspect for code violations." I nearly laughed. Construction? We've barely unpacked our boxes. He looked at his clipboard and recited, "Allegedly, you installed an illegal addition to the property and failed to secure the proper permits." I handed him the paperwork I'd received from the county, a pristine record confirming that no such work had ever been done. He scratched his head, muttered something about anonymous complaints, and apologized before leaving. 2 hours later, while I was helping Emily set up the living room, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was a stern-looking woman with a badge from the Department of Environmental Protection. "Mr. Butler, we need to speak with you about a potential septic tank installation in a protected wetland area." I blinked. I don't even have a shovel, let alone a septic project. "Where are you getting this?" She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, and finally admitted, "We received multiple reports from a concerned citizen claiming you were building in a prohibited zone." I bit back a curse. "Let me guess, Karen?" She didn't answer, but the silence told me everything. By the afternoon, I got the trifecta, a notice from the state tax office. Someone had filed a complaint alleging that my house was purchased at a suspiciously low price and requested a review for possible fraud. That was the moment I set my coffee mug down and smiled, not out of joy, but because I knew exactly how to deal with this kind of harassment. My old job investigating financial crimes had taught me how to trace patterns, and Karen had just lit up like a neon sign. I called in a favor from an old colleague, Sam, who still worked in the county's IT department. I sent him the complaint emails and asked him to trace the IP addresses. 2 hours later, Sam called back with a chuckle. "You'll like this one, Jeremy. All 3 complaints came from the same IP. Guess where?" I didn't even need to answer. Sam continued, "Yup. That HOA office across the street, the one with Karen's SUV parked out front. He offered to forward the metadata logs in case I needed them for a formal report. I told him to send everything. That evening, I told Emily what I'd found. She sat at the kitchen table shaking her head. She's unhinged. What's her endgame?" I smirked. "Whatever it is, she picked the wrong guy. Tomorrow, I'm calling her bluff." I spent the rest of the evening setting up the rest of the cameras and adjusting their angles so they covered every inch of the driveway and front lawn. If Karen or any of her cronies tried anything again, I'd have footage from 3 different angles. Later that night, as I stepped onto the porch for some fresh air, I spotted Karen's silver SUV creeping past the house. She slowed down just enough to glare at me through her tinted window before speeding off. I raised my coffee mug to her in a mock toast. "Game on," I murmured to myself. If she wanted to play, I was ready to play harder. 2 days later, I received a formal invitation shoved into my mailbox, written in bold, officious language and signed by Karen Dabney, HOA President. It announced an emergency community meeting to address the fraudulent occupancy of property within Cypress Bend. I almost laughed out loud at the audacity. Emily, however, didn't find it as amusing. "She's trying to humiliate us in front of the neighborhood," she said, reading the letter over my shoulder. I nodded. "Good. Let her try. I'm going to show up and settle this nonsense in front of everyone." That evening, I walked into the HOA clubhouse, a gaudy building with tacky wallpaper and a chandelier that looked like it belonged in a discount Vegas casino. The room was already filled with neighbors, some sitting stiffly with arms crossed, others whispering in corners. At the front of the room, standing like a queen on her throne, was Karen, dressed in a navy blazer and pearls. She gave me a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, well, Mr. Butler, I'm surprised you had the courage to come." I took a seat in the front row, deliberately placing a thick folder of documents on the table in front of me. Karen began her speech with all the pomp of a dictator. "As many of you know, we have a serious issue with a family who has unlawfully moved into a property that rightfully belongs to my sister's client. We, as a community, must decide whether to take action to reclaim this property and preserve the integrity of Cypress Bend." There were murmurs in the room. A few people nodded, but others glanced at me with uncertainty. When Karen dramatically pointed at me and said, "This man is squatting in what should be a Cypress Bend property," I stood up slowly. Actually, I said, letting my voice cut through the whispers, this property isn't in Cypress Bend. It's never been part of your HOA, and it never will be. Let me prove it. I opened the folder and laid out copies of the title deed, the closing documents, and a certified county map showing the original property lines. I held the map high so everyone could see the bright red line marking the HOA boundary, a line that stopped several yards short of my driveway. This is from the county land office, signed by Judge Halpern 15 years ago, I said. When the HOA expanded, my property was specifically excluded. I'm not part of your HOA. I don't owe you fees, and I don't answer to your rules. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Karen's jaw tightened. That map could be fake, she snapped. Your documents mean nothing until they've been reviewed by the HOA board. I raised an eyebrow. The HOA board doesn't have legal jurisdiction over private land, Karen. But you're welcome to challenge this in court. I'll enjoy watching that get thrown out. A man in the back, Tom, the neighbor who had warned me, stood and cleared his throat. Karen, I've seen that map myself. He's right. That house isn't part of the HOA. Maybe we should back off. There was a ripple of agreement from several other neighbors. Karen's face flushed crimson, but she forced a smile. This meeting isn't over, she said through clenched teeth. There are other ways to handle situations like this. I didn't wait for her to invent more theatrics. I gathered my documents, gave Tom a nod of thanks, and walked out. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt the tension in my shoulders loosen just a bit. But the moment I saw Karen glaring from the clubhouse window, her lips moving as if muttering some promise of revenge, I knew this was far from finished. If anything, I'd just added fuel to her fire. The day after the HOA showdown, I woke up with a clear plan in mind. If Karen wanted a war, I was done playing defense. I spent the morning combing through the public records for Cypress Bend's HOA. Their financial statements were posted online, but in the kind of messy, half-complete way that screamed either negligence or deliberate obfuscation. Within an hour, I spotted the first red flag, a line item labeled Community Outreach Expenses that had recurring charges for a luxury spa in Charleston. Another category titled Board Travel Allowance included a 5-day cruise to the Bahamas. I smirked. HOA funds weren't meant to bankroll vacations. After a strong cup of coffee, I called an old contact from my IRS days, a tax attorney named David Ramirez. David was sharp, ruthless, and loved nothing more than tearing apart fraudulent accounting. I explained the situation, emailed him copies of the financials, and within 2 hours, he called back laughing. Jeremy, this HOA is a goldmine of violations. If your Karen is the president, she's in deep. Misuse of funds, no independent audits, and missing board signatures. This is textbook abuse of authority. You should file a formal complaint with the state auditor. I'll even draft the letter for you. While David worked on that, I focused on the neighborhood narrative. Karen had been spreading rumors like wildfire, claiming I was some kind of tax dodger who illegally undercut the price of my property. To counter that, I printed out a clean, official copy of my closing documents and property tax receipts, ready to show anyone who asked. That afternoon, while Emily was unpacking boxes with Lauren, I strolled over to Tom's house. Tom welcomed me with a cold beer and a knowing smile. I saw the way you handled Karen at the meeting. You've got guts. People around here have been scared to cross her for years. Honestly, you're doing us all a favor. I asked Tom if he'd heard any of Karen's recent gossip. He nodded. She's telling anyone who'll listen that she's going to have you evicted. But I think people are starting to realize she's overreaching. He paused, lowering his voice. She's also bragging about how much she earns from managing the HOA. I always thought that sounded off. Later, as I walked back to my house, I caught sight of Karen herself standing in her driveway, talking to a group of neighbors. She stopped mid-sentence as soon as she saw me, giving me that frozen, fake smile. I gave her a slow, deliberate nod and walked past without a word, but I could feel her eyes burning holes in my back. That evening, David sent me the draft of the official complaint to the state auditor. It was a masterpiece, detailing everything from the suspicious spa expenses to the Bahamas cruise and several payments made to a company owned by Karen's sister. I printed it out, signed it, and dropped it off with the courier before dinner. As I placed the envelope in the outgoing box, I felt a shift in the game. Karen might have started this war, but I was about to hit her where it really hurt, her carefully constructed little empire. Before going to bed, I set up the last of my outdoor cameras, including one aimed directly at the street in front of the house. If Karen or any of her allies tried anything sneaky, I'd catch them in high definition. Emily watched me from the porch, arms crossed. "You're planning something, aren't you?" I smiled. Let's just say I'm done being polite. The next few days were quiet on the surface, but I could feel the tension rippling through the neighborhood. The real fireworks began when I started receiving calls from homeowners I'd never even met. It turned out the state auditor's office had already sent preliminary requests for financial records to the HOA board. That meant Karen's carefully guarded books were now public enemy number one, and word was spreading fast. By Wednesday afternoon, a knock on my door revealed a frazzled man who introduced himself as Pete, the HOA's former treasurer. "You didn't hear this from me," he said, glancing over his shoulder like he expected Karen to materialize with a pitchfork. "But I left the board last year because Karen was using HOA funds like her personal credit card. I have copies of the receipts if you want them." Pete handed me a flash drive that looked like it had been through a war. Scratched, taped, but still intact. That evening, I plugged it into my laptop and nearly choked on my beer. There they were, payments to Karen's sister's realty consulting firm, unexplained checks written to cash, and a line item simply labeled Karen's garden supplies that totaled over $5,000 in 1 month. I knew then that I had her. I spent half the night categorizing the files and sending the juiciest ones to David, my attorney. His reply was short but sweet. This is enough to bring down her entire board. Meanwhile, Karen was growing more desperate. One morning, I found a glossy HOA bulletin pinned to my front door, featuring a photo of Karen with the headline, "Protecting Our Community." The article accused me of illegally circumventing HOA guidelines and warned neighbors to remain vigilant. Emily read it and laughed so hard she almost cried. "She's running a smear campaign," I said. "She's getting sloppy." But I didn't underestimate her. Karen was like a cornered animal now, and cornered animals bite. By Friday, I decided it was time to take my evidence to the court of public opinion. I arranged an informal meeting with a few trusted neighbors, Tom, Pete, and a couple who lived 2 houses down. We met in Tom's garage, surrounded by dusty garden tools and the smell of motor oil. I spread out the printed receipts and financial statements on his workbench. "Here," I said, tapping a page with a charge for Cyprus HOA, Bahamas cruise package. "This is where your monthly fees went. Spa days, cruises, fake consulting fees. She's been bleeding this neighborhood dry." The reactions were priceless. Anger, disbelief, then a kind of grim satisfaction. "We've suspected for years," Tom said, "but we never had proof. If this gets out, Karen's finished." We all agreed to keep things quiet for the moment, just until the state auditor's team completed their preliminary investigation. In the meantime, I would act as the lightning rod, the guy Karen could focus her wrath on while the walls closed in around her. That night, as I was locking up, I noticed Karen's SUV parked across the street, headlights off, just sitting there. I walked out to the edge of my driveway and stared straight at her. After a moment, the SUV roared to life and sped away. I smiled to myself. If she thought intimidation was going to work, she was dead wrong. By Monday, the gloves were off. I woke to find a crudely written note shoved under my door. "Drop your complaints or you'll regret it." The paper reeked of cheap perfume, the kind Karen seemed to bathe in. Emily was furious, but I told her to stay calm. "This isn't fear," I said. "This is desperation. She knows she's losing control." Still, I wasn't about to let threats slide. I called Officer Henderson and filed an official harassment report, handing over the note and the latest footage from my security cameras. One clip showed Karen's nephew, a lanky kid with a buzz cut, loitering near our front gate just after midnight. Henderson promised to pay a friendly visit to their house and make it clear that harassment charges were on the table. If this continued, that afternoon, things escalated further. I found fresh scratches on the side of my SUV, deliberate and deep, like someone had taken a key to the paint. I didn't even need to guess who was behind it. My camera footage caught the culprit, the same nephew, smirking like he'd just won a prize. I sent the video directly to Henderson and to David, who immediately added property damage to the growing list of offenses in our complaint file. Emily wanted to confront Karen right then, but I stopped her. "We don't lower ourselves to her level," I told her. "We bury her with evidence." Meanwhile, Karen was scrambling to spin the narrative. She scheduled a special HOA gathering at the community lawn, inviting the local news station as if she could portray herself as a victim. I went, not because I wanted to see her performance, but because I wanted everyone to see the truth. When I arrived, Karen was already in front of a small crowd, voice trembling with rehearsed outrage. "This man," she declared, pointing at me like I was on trial, "is trying to destroy our community. He's attacking our HOA with baseless accusations." I let her ramble for a few minutes, then stepped forward, calm and deliberate. "Baseless? You mean the $5,000 garden supply charges on your HOA account? Or the Bahamas cruise labeled as a maintenance expense? I have all the documents right here. Would you like me to read the dates and amounts allowed?" I held up a thick binder filled with printed receipts. The crowd murmured, eyes widening. One of the neighbors, a woman named Janet, stepped closer, glaring at Karen. "Is this true?" she demanded. Karen tried to wave it off, muttering something about fake documents, but the doubt in the crowd was obvious. As if to punctuate my point, my phone buzzed with an email from the state auditor's office. They had officially launched a formal investigation into Cypress HOA and requested immediate access to all records. I looked at Karen and smiled. "Looks like the state's interested too." She went pale, her voice faltering. The crowd started to disperse, whispering to each other. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. That evening, I held a quiet meeting with Tom and Pete in my kitchen. We discussed organizing a neighborhood vote to temporarily suspend Karen from her position as HOA president until the investigation concluded. "The tide is turning," Tom said. "People are starting to see her for what she is." I nodded, but I also knew Karen wasn't done. Bullies like her rarely go down without swinging. Sure enough, later that night, one of my cameras caught her pacing near the end of my driveway, muttering under her breath before storming off. Whatever she was planning next, I'd be ready. The next week marked the tipping point. The state auditor's office officially contacted every homeowner in Cypress Bend, requesting cooperation with their investigation. Karen naturally called an emergency HOA rally in the clubhouse, trying to spin the narrative one last time. Emily didn't want me to go. She feared Karen might try to bait me into an argument, but I knew it was the perfect chance to finish what I started. I arrived early, binder in hand, and made sure to sit front and center where she couldn't ignore me. Karen stormed into the room, dressed in a pristine white suit like she was heading to court, which, in a way, she was. "Before we begin," she announced, "I want to address the slanderous lies being spread about me and this HOA. Certain individuals," she glanced at me with a venomous smirk, "are trying to tear apart our community with fabricated accusations." I leaned back in my chair, letting her dig her hole. When she finally stopped, I calmly stood. "Funny you call them lies," I said, placing copies of bank statements on the table, "because these statements come directly from your treasurer's files, signed and dated. Would you like me to explain the charge labeled Board Retreat, Royal Caribbean Cruise, or the $30,000 funneled to your sister's so-called consulting firm?" The room erupted in whispers. Tom, who'd been waiting for this moment, stood up and said, "We deserve to see where our money's going. This man isn't lying. I've seen the same documents." Karen's face went pale. She opened her mouth to retort, but I cut her off, my voice steady and firm. "If anyone here doubts the truth, the state auditor's office will be holding a public session next week, and I'll be there with every single receipt." Her carefully constructed facade started to crack. "This is harassment," she shouted, slamming her hands on the table. "You're nothing but a con artist who tricked his way into a home that doesn't even belong to him." I took a step forward and pulled a certified copy of my property deed from my folder, holding it up for everyone to see. "This deed says otherwise. You've harassed me, filed false complaints, and used HOA funds for personal luxuries. And now, Karen, you're about to answer for all of it." Suddenly, a man in the back, one of the HOA board members, raised his hand. I moved to hold a vote for Karen's suspension as president pending the state audit. Another voice followed, then another, until nearly every hand in the room was raised except hers. Karen's lips trembled as she realized the tide had turned. "This is illegal. You can't just vote me out," she cried. But the room was already buzzing with voices demanding a change. For once, she wasn't the loudest person in the room. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me, thanking me for standing up to her. Some even offered to testify on my behalf if Karen tried to take me to court. When I returned home, Emily was waiting on the porch, arms crossed. "How did it go?" she asked. I smiled, feeling the first genuine relief since moving in. "She's finished," I said. "The board just suspended her." But I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. People like Karen don't fade quietly. They lash out when cornered. That night, I reviewed my security footage once more before bed. Around midnight, the cameras caught Karen's nephew creeping along the side of my property, fiddling with something near the fence. I zoomed in and saw him trying to loosen the bolts on my gate. I grabbed my phone and called Henderson. "Time to make an example," I told him. "Let's see how brave they are when the cops get involved." The following morning began with flashing lights in my driveway. Officer Henderson had responded quickly to my midnight call. Karen's nephew was still lingering around when the patrol car rolled up, and the kid froze like a deer caught in headlights. Henderson was in no mood for games. "Step away from the property, son," he ordered, hand resting on his holster. I walked out onto the porch in my boots and jeans, coffee mug in hand, and watched the scene unfold with a mix of irritation and satisfaction. The kid stammered something about just checking the fence, but Henderson had already seen the footage I'd sent him. Within minutes, the boy was in the back of the patrol car, trembling as Henderson read him his rights for attempted property damage and trespassing. As they drove off, I knew it was only a matter of time before Karen showed up. Sure enough, less than an hour later, her silver SUV screeched into my driveway. She jumped out red-faced and shaking with fury. "How dare you have my nephew arrested? He's just a boy," she yelled. I took a long sip of coffee and replied, "Your boy tried to sabotage my property at midnight. The cameras caught him. Maybe you should spend less time bullying your neighbors and more time teaching your family about laws." Her eyes widened with rage, and for a split second, I thought she might lunge at me. Instead, she pointed a trembling finger. "You're going to pay for this, Butler. I'll sue you for defamation, for harassment, for everything." I couldn't help but laugh. "Sue me? With what money? Your HOA slush fund. Last I checked, the state is already coming after you for fraud. Maybe you should focus on not going to jail." She sputtered something incoherent before storming back to her SUV and speeding off. I stood there for a moment, the morning sun warming my face, and thought, that felt good. That afternoon, David called with more good news. "Jeremy, the auditor's office fast-tracked the investigation. We've got enough evidence to file a civil suit for damages, harassment, defamation, property damage, and legal fees. We're looking at a six-figure payout." I grinned. "Let's do it." By evening, the paperwork was filed, and Karen officially had a lawsuit with her name on it. The next few days were a whirlwind. News of the arrest and the lawsuit spread through Cypress Bend like wildfire. Neighbors who had once been silent started approaching me to share their own horror stories of Karen's reign. Fines for leaving trash bins out for 10 minutes too long, threats over Christmas decorations, even forcing someone to repaint their house. Twice in 1 year because she didn't like the shade. The more I listened, the more I realized Karen's downfall was long overdue. Tom and Pete helped me organize a neighborhood petition demanding her permanent removal as HOA president and a full audit of all past HOA funds. The turning point came when the local news station showed up at my gate. I wasn't planning on talking to reporters, but one look at Karen standing behind them, trying to spin the story with her crocodile tears, and I changed my mind. I invited the crew onto my porch, showed them the security footage, the official documents, and even a few of Karen's threatening notes. The segment aired that evening under the headline, "HOA President Under Fire for Fraud and Harassment." By the next day, Karen's name was on everyone's lips, and not in a flattering way. Emily and Lauren finally started to feel at ease, seeing the tide turn. Emily hugged me that night and whispered, "You're really going to end this, aren't you?" I kissed her forehead. "Oh, I'm just getting started. She's going to regret every stunt she pulled." As I checked my email one last time before bed, I saw a notification from David. Karen had received the court summons, and based on what I knew about her, she was either going to crumble or double down. I was ready for both. The court date came faster than I expected. On a bright Tuesday morning, I walked into the county courthouse with David by my side, carrying a binder thick enough to choke a mule. Across the hallway stood Karen, wearing a beige pantsuit and an expression that hovered somewhere between panic and rage. Her sister was there too, nervously flipping through papers, though I suspected none of them had anything resembling evidence. As we entered the courtroom, Karen shot me a glare that could peel paint. I smiled back and gave a little wave, just to watch her seethe. The hearing was almost comedic. Karen's attorney, a slick-looking man with too much hair gel, tried to argue that I had illegally occupied the house because the HOA had rights to reclaim the property. The judge, a sharp-witted woman in her 60s, raised an eyebrow and said, "Ma'am, this property isn't even in your HOA jurisdiction. Why are you here?" David slid our packet of evidence across the table, starting with the deed, then the title report, and finally the stack of HOA financial records that looked more like a luxury vacation log than community expenses. The judge spent 10 minutes flipping through them, then looked at Karen like she was trying to decide whether to laugh or scold her. "Ms. Dabney," she said finally, "do you have any legal claim to Mr. Butler's property?" Karen stammered, "Well, my sister—" The judge cut her off. "Number. This is not how property ownership works." By the time David presented the video footage of Karen's nephew vandalizing my fence and the threatening notes, the judge's patience had evaporated. In a decisive tone, she ruled in our favor, awarding us $127,000 in damages, enough to cover my legal expenses, the repairs, and a healthy slice of compensation for the months of harassment. Karen's jaw dropped like a bad actor in a soap opera. The judge wasn't done. Given the evidence of financial misconduct, this court is recommending that the state auditor continue its investigation into the Cypress Bend HOA and Ms. Dabney's role in misappropriating funds. It was the final nail in the coffin. 2 weeks later, the neighborhood officially voted Karen out as HOA president. Her sister's real estate license was revoked after the state board reviewed her involvement in the fraudulent complaints. Their empire crumbled overnight. By the time a "for sale" sign appeared on Karen's lawn, I didn't even bother to celebrate. I simply walked past, nodded at the sign, and kept living my life. Life returned to normal quickly. The neighbors, relieved to be free of Karen's tyranny, rallied together. Tom and Pete led the creation of a new HOA committee, one that focused on actual community improvements rather than power trips. Emily and I threw a backyard cookout to celebrate. For the first time since we'd moved in, I felt like this house wasn't just a property I'd won in a bidding war. It was our home. 3 months later, I decided to turn a corner of our yard into something that symbolized the new chapter. I set up a small free library stand by the driveway, stocked it with books I loved, and built a bench under the oak tree for neighbors to sit and read. Above the library was a small sign Emily made, painted in bold letters, "No room for lies." It wasn't just a message to Karen, it was a reminder to everyone that decency and honesty would always win here. The final cherry on top came when I heard that the old HOA office, once Karen's little throne room, had been sold to a local coffee shop. They left her big leather chair in the corner as a kind of novelty seat. Whenever I pass by, I see kids laughing as they sit in it, pretending to rule the neighborhood. It's the perfect end to her story, a dethroned queen reduced to a joke in a cafe. One evening, as the sun set and the air turned golden, Emily joined me on the porch. "You know," she said, leaning against my shoulder, "you didn't just win against Karen. You changed this place." I looked around at the quiet street, the neighbors chatting on their lawns, and Lauren playing catch with the dog. "We didn't move here to fight," I said softly, "but if anyone tries to mess with our family again, they'll learn the same lesson Karen did. This house isn't just ours, it's untouchable." Emily smiled, and for the first time since we'd moved in, I felt an unshakable sense of peace. The war was over, and I'd won it my way.